Welcome to the Family Pictures Podcast. The first episode, I'm Michael Branson Smith, and this is Jim Groom.
Hi.
This is a podcast about all things dysfunctional and wonderful in family found in film. This is an idea Jim and I have had, and we're hoping to make this thing take off. And for our first episode, we're going on a road trip, right?
We are.
We
are
headed
across the country.
Yes, from Chicago to LA with, stops in Missouri, Kansas, and I believe Arizona, right?
Yeah, St. Louis. Yeah, Missouri, you're right. And then Colorado. And then, yeah, that's right, Utah, Arizona, and then Los Angeles.
I don't know if they make it through Utah, but yeah, I mean, and so for everybody knows, this is National Lampoon's Vacation, 1983 film directed by Harold Ramis, the famous, SNL, and we have Chevy Chase coming off of Caddyshack, and probably a much more appropriate part, because I don't know if Chevy Chase makes much of a dad, but we'll be talking about that. It was written by John Hughes, and, it kicks right off with all the trappings of what a nuclear family should imagine is their vacation is about, as we go through those postcards from the 50s, and we see those lovely, buildings with cowboy hat shapes and crocodile faces and fish and, what a joy a family trip is, right?
Those restaurants, I can think about those, those kind of gimmicky restaurants. I thought that was so wonderful with those postcards.
Yeah, did you ever as a Long Island kid, and I want to hear some family trips. Did you ever go to the Big Duck out on Long Island?
I seen the Big Duck, never went to the Big Duck.
You never went to I've been to the Big Duck because of there used to be rowing races there, and the Big Duck's fucking awesome. It's the best. So the family road trip, that's the thing. We're going to get into the details of the Griswold's road trip, but I thought we'd start what's the family road trip mean to you, Jim? What do you think about when you think family road trip?
Well, so I grew up in the 70s. That's when I would have done 70s, early 80s is when I would have done a trip like Rusty. Rusty's 12, I think, in this.
Yeah.
So just say I'm Rusty if that's who I was supposed to be.
Okay, Rusty.
So we only went on one. We took another one, but we literally did not vacation. So we took one road trip, and we had a new Suburban, a big old 78, the Bluebird, as my dad would call it, Suburban, beautiful car, the car of my childhood. And there were 7 of us, so 7 kids. And my mom's in the car, we're in the car's all loaded out. We're going up to Maine. We lived on Long Island. We're going up to Maine to this unknown lodge in the middle of nowhere near Canada. And my dad this was his trip. He finally sprung for a trip. And he refused to get in the car. So he starts the trip by yelling and screaming about something we didn't know. And he's like, I'm not going. We're not going in the car. This went on for 3 hours.
What time of day was it? Were you
it was morning. It was 7 in the morning or 8 in the morning. And then he threw a fit. He was one of the kids. And he wouldn't get in the car. And we were like, Dad, let's go. Come on. No, I'm not going. Blah, 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 blah. And so that's what I remember about our road trip, was just what a jerk my dad was when it came to getting in the car and going on a simple road trip.
So what kind of preparations, what gear did you have to ready yourself? Because you were 12-year-old Rusty, what was your stuff?
Adidas sweatsuits.
Nice.
That really hits it home. I had a red and blue Adidas sweatsuit. And this is a little before Run DMC made the Adidas sweatsuit what it is.
Right.
So this was, and we have pictures. So I have pictures of me in this red and blue.
Oh, we gotta find ways to put stuff like that up. We're a little novice in this first one. So my family trip. So we did a lot of road trips because my mom was obsessed with. She was a single mom, but she was you're gonna know your family. So the 2 major directions we would head north from Hartford area of Connecticut to Buffalo. And Buffalo is just it's an endless trip. It's just like you're on I-90 forever.
It's like going cross country, but in New York.
Yeah, it just never ends. But that wasn't the more memorable one, because we more annually went every summer to North Carolina to visit her family. So up north was to my father's family, his mother, and down south was my mother's family. And she had the Volvo, she always bought used Volvos, and she's bought used Volvos to this day. And this was one of the like classic, it was red, but it was super faded. So it was almost like pink, like it was back when cars, the paint faded,
it was the
right?
boxy Volvo, huh?
It was super boxy, and it was the best because this is the era when seatbelts didn't exist in our parents' minds. And so we would fold down the entire back. And so my brother and I would have free reign to just like crawl around and play in the back of the Volvo, right? And I remember my mom would try to like set us up to be entertained. And that's the thing, is like entertainment was so different. Like our kids now, like they just pop in the iPad or the iPhone and they're just like, and they're done. They're all set. But she got us those, like, for the first time, she got us those, like, remember the Super Friends characters with the knit, like, things? It's like, it was like
absolutely.
Superman and Aquaman, like 70s characters. And those were
they had like Lycra suits that were like knitted capes. Absolutely.
Yeah. So that was like our first trip. But probably the most memorable event of one of these trips, and I was 13, was the Summer Olympics in 1984. And right? So this is the boycott Olympics. Right. And something that was funny about the boycott Olympics is there was the McDonald's tie-in. You remember, like, you would get your Coke, your Big Coke or a Big Mac, and you'd rip the little thing and it would tell you the event. And if you won a medal, if the Americans won a medal in this event, right, then you could redeem it for a free. If it was a gold, it was like another free Big Mac. If it was a silver, it was a fries. And if it was a bronze, it was like a soda, right? Well, they did the statistics, the data on this thing before the boycott, right? So we ate free McDonald's for basically the entire trip down. It was so, in retrospect, so gross. But like, this is when, the Americans for the first time ever were winning like shooting events. And it's like, sweet, kayak, gold medal, another Big Mac, Mom.
That is awesome.
Yeah.
I didn't even think of that. Like in the Summer Olympics, which were in Los Angeles, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah.
How fun is that?
It was always an event. I mean, and there was always the like games, like since we were regulars at this, we had like the license plate games and going through the alphabet. And, New York City was always a thing because we'd always have to pass through New York. And there always seemed to be a different direction you would go to get through New York. And because it was like, but we were like, New York City, because it was like a suburban kid, right? So the preparations for the Griswolds are quite interesting. It starts right away with, a disaster of not quite getting the vehicle they planned on, right?
Yeah. Interesting. I did a little research on this because I was fascinated. And it turns out like the guy who designed that station wagon,
the Wagon Queen family truckster.
So he also designed like the Batmobile and the Munstermobile.
Awesome.
And so he's this famous like car designer for films.
Okay.
And this was his kind of like basically poking fun at 70 station wagons.
Right.
This was the ultimate ugly wagon.
Metallic P.
His name was George Barris, by the way.
All right,
and
super cool.
He basically they brought him on to design this station wagon. What a cool job that must be.
Yeah. Design. Yeah. That's pretty great, right? And so they map out. I love how they map out their trip, right? You remember, it's like they turn it into a video game, which is so interesting. It's like,
oh my gosh,
kids want to see the family triptych. That's what the line is. It's like, what?
Yeah. And they're playing, I don't think it's the Vectrix. I think it's like I don't know what console they're playing. It's not the Vectrix, but it's some like F80 or some weird console. But then Antonella, so I'm watching this with my wife Antonella, and she's like, could that really happen where Pac-Man could eat their trip? I'm like, no, this is graphic designing, you know?
I know. And so, and it is a 2,400 plus mile trip, right? And one thing I have to say is, like, as we're going through parts of this trip and talking about it, I took note of basically every single one of Clark's outfits throughout the film, because he was like the classic, you know, we have, you know, Clark Griswold played by Chevy Chase, right? And we have Ellen Griswold, the mom, played by Beverly D'Angelo, who's amazing, who has this incredible, like, big 80s hair. It's like amazing, right?
She's great.
And he starts off at buying the car in this bad light blue suit and his giant glasses, right? And so he starts off really hot, like this is his working outfit, right? And right, and so we're off to a good start. And so one of the things is about road trips, and despite, you know, all the yelling, there's some early energy to a road trip, right? When you finally get on the road, there's that initial excitement, especially this is Buffalo. You're like, all right, we're off. And then you're just like going through hills and hills of Buffalo. Or if you've ever driven cross country, because I once drove from Chicago to the end of Long Island, actually, and you're in Pennsylvania for like 10 hours. It's like insane. Right?
Yeah, it's forever. I agree. I have done that drive. It is forever. And cops were everywhere.
Yeah. And so, you know, they're singing in the car and they're hanging out and everybody's excited. And you know what's funny? It made me think of, like, they're singing the Marty Moose song, right? And that makes me think of, like, I mean, I wasn't a singing family. Like I said, we played games. But did you notice behind Audrey's head, there was a little mini Pac-Man machine?
Yes, I did. And he brings it out again when he's going to the cousin. It's on the bed when he's at the cousin's. And the cousin's like, what do you do here? And, you know, we'll get to that. Yeah, the nudie magazine.
Oh, that's by far probably the best scene in the movie, is the extent. And we'll get there soon, because they take a little brief sojourn in St. Louis, right? And, you know, they get their hubcaps given away, and they get a nice custom paint job in the rear of the car, right?
That's awesome.
But this leads to the first time Clark, miserable dad that he is in a weird way, almost kills the family. This is the first of 3 times he almost kills the family.
It's right. Well, I have to say, I was watching this, so I watched it this week, you know, in preparation for our discussion. And I really, like, Chevy Chase is someone who's kind of fallen off, right? Because he didn't have, like, the career like a Bill Murray, which was very consistent. And he didn't also die too soon, like someone like Belushi, so he lives forever, right? But he was part of that SNC, you know, SNL kind of, you know, beginning, foundational group.
Yeah.
And he's had a very strange career. But I think, personally, like, this Clark Griswold is Chevy Chase at his best. And the scene you're talking about is the scene where he's asleep at the car, like the wife is like, at the wheel, and his wife is like, you're all right? He's like, yeah, I'm all right. And then the shot comes where you see the kids in the back sleeping, and then you see, you know, Beverly D'Angelo, the wife, sleeping, and then you slowly pan over to a sleeping Griswold, which is amazing. And then he starts going off the highway, and then through people's yards and through their, like, basically garages, and then ends up magically at the hotel. I love that scene. It's hysterical. Like, I laughed out loud a lot while watching this one.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's in part, you have to think about it. That's like Harold Ramis. Like, there's no, like, subtle humor in Harold Ramis. Is like, you know, I think of, like, the Blues Brothers, and literally, like, hundreds of cops and military personnel showing up at the very end to arrest the Blues Brothers at the city hall, right? Like, so he doesn't bury his his idea of what's funny. It's very physical, it's very extreme, and it's very wonderful.
Yeah.
And this leads to probably one of many of the first, you know, they're in the hotel, and we got our first, like, horny Clark, right?
I love horny Clark. And it goes so wrong, too, which is so great. So, I don't know. Do you want to describe the scene, or should I?
Well, he literally, like, they set it up with a nice, like, remake of the shower scene from Psycho. And Clark's, instead of the knife, got the banana. He's got his banana out, right? It's like, I'm ready for my banana. And it's like, can I do your front? And Beverly's like, no, you go do your front.
And as a 12-year-old watching this movie, I was like, this is a breast scene.
Yep.
Right? Beverly D'Angelo, it's a breast scene, which meant a lot to a 12-year-old kid who was watching these 80s movies.
Yes, with limited access to, it's not the same now.
Yeah, exactly. It is not the same now. That is right.
But it also like speaks to what's great, and this is the family dynamic moment here. It's like, it also speaks to the notion of like, sex in the context of vacationing with children, right? And like, because they have this very terrible situation with the 25-cent vibrating bed that goes badly, which hilariously Rusty instantly fixed, right? Because he's the genius on the trip compared to everybody else for the most part, right?
He just unplugs the bed, and it tells you a lot about the motel they're in,
right?
It's a pay to play 25 cents for I don't know what kind of bed is. It's like, have you ever seen one of those in action? Like,
no, but it's like definitely a trope of like the 70s and 80s of like seedy sex spaces, right? Like there's somehow a mechanical motor that has some sort of throttle that moves the bed back and forth, right?
Exactly. Like, and you can get in the kind of groove of the bed, I think.
Yeah, that's wild.
It is awesome.
Yes, and so they go off and they have their nice first, true Americana visit in Dodge City.
Wait. We got to go back to the.
Oh wait, what am I missing?
Scene. Well, we're good missing.
Oh, okay, go.
So they go off the bed and they go onto the floor.
Right.
And so the kids walk in on them while they're
about
to.
Yes.
But my Aunt Danella's favorite scene when we watched it and was funny is when Chevy Chase was trying to say, they were like, where's mom? And he was like, he puts his finger to say like in the bathroom.
Right.
And then she's like, I'm here, kids. And he just suddenly like brings his finger and hand down and looks away. And like, there's these really subtle moments where Chevy Chase, I think, really is doing some of what I think is some of his best work. And I'm not a huge Chevy Chase fan, but watching this movie again, I was like, rock on, Chevy. Like, you're doing it. And like, I just thought he was funny as hell.
Yeah. I mean, especially when he's emoting, right? And it's a pantomime of emotion. Always, right?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, we'll get to that. There's some good examples.
Exactly. Yeah. We'll hold off on that. And so they're finally at their first bit of Americana. They make it out of Missouri, and now they're in Kansas, and they hit Dodge City in one of these like Western remake towns. And I think the only thing that's like interesting of this is like it's showing Clark's just like poor ability to just not interact with the world well, right? So he's role playing as like a surly customer at the saloon with the bartender, and lo and behold, the bartender gets picked up and he pulls out a shotgun and shoots him. It's right? Awesome. Like, oh my God. But the best part, I think, is that because it's obviously blanks, it's not real, but the daughter, Audrey, who's played very much not much of a role yet, is suddenly deaf, right? and Ellen's like, happy now, Clark, she's deaf. The classic like diss of the precursor to a real fight. It's like, happy, this is what you've done to our kid, right? You've ruined her for life.
The best part of that scene for me is the insults that Clark like throws at the bartender. It's like, hey, liver lips, hey, yellow belly, or whatever. But then his last one was, hey, underpants. I was like, what? Underpants? That was my favorite. That's one of my favorite quotes from the whole movie. And my kids always are like, your quotes make no sense. Like, who's going to understand an underpants quote?
I mean, I imagine there's a certain amount of like, they're so used to it. There must have been a lot of improvisation to the lines. It wouldn't surprise me at the least. Yeah.
He's like, hey, yellow belly, hey, underpants. And that's when the guy gets up and shoots him with the shotgun, which is another hysterical scene.
Oh, and by the way, and so Clark is on to, I think, like outfit number 2 at this point. And Clark's now, wait, I got to double check. He's in his green and black plaid button down with khaki pants, and he's got his cowboy hat and big glasses. He's like playing the role of the good dude or dudette dude at this place. But this leads to probably my favorite scene of the film is when they meet the cousins, right? And Randy Quaid just like rolls right up and just kills it.
Steals
as
the show.
Yeah. As as cousin Eddie. All right. Yeah. And so they my sense is it's Ellen's, right? Cousins.
That's right.
And
I think it's Ellen's cousin, the wife of Eddie.
Right. And that's Catherine, right? And Catherine's pregnant with child number 6.
Which my family could relate to.
Yeah, and so as we roll up, we meet the entire family, which includes sorry, let's get this right. We've got Vicky and Dale, who are teenagers similar in age to Audrey and Rusty, and then we have Eddie Jr., who's like 5 or 6, Junior, who's a baby. So there's like 2 juniors.
And Junior just might be the name.
And Daisy Mabel, who apparently was born without a tongue. And by the way, that's Harold Ramis's daughter.
I did not know that. That's awesome.
Yeah. So a little appearance of a little family nepotism of the director's daughter in there. And so my famous first notice, it's like, so everybody's being introduced, but if you look closely, right, we've got cousin Eddie. He's got his like khaki tank, right? He's got a 6-pack dangling, one more Coors dangling from the webbing of the 6-pack that's unopened while he's got it in his other hand, the one he's working on, right?
Yeah.
And he's got a nice rope belt. And so at first you're like, cousin Eddie, man, you are not showing up well for this greeting here, right? But later on, he presents.
Oh my God, does he? When he's doing the grill.
Yes, but we'll get to that in a moment because the kids have to go off and, the teenagers have to meet one another. And this is where we get some gems from, and we get basically Audrey's setup for the remainder of the film. But so Vicky and Audrey go spend a little time on the seesaw, and Vicky's like talking about her French kissing skills.
That's right. Yeah.
And, it's really, this is cousin Eddie saying, like, Audrey says that, cousin Vicky says, like, my daddy says I'm really good at it. And Audrey's like, what the fuck?
Yeah. That's a line that just would not make it into a film, comedy like that today.
No.
It just would never get off the cutting room floor.
Right. And I think, like, you got Vicky goes on to diss. I'm sorry. We got Audrey goes on to diss cousin Eddie, cousin Vicky's like farm living, but then she whips out the shoebox full of homegrown pot, and that just steers Audrey for the remainder of the film, I think.
She's just a pothead after that.
Yeah, she's like, this is awesome. I'm putting on my shades and I'm sweet for the rest of this vacation.
Yeah. Her role is pretty minor given that she's one of the family, but like in some ways she might be like the forgotten hero. She just got high the whole trip.
Exactly. And meanwhile, cousin Dale has a really important role in Rusty's young life here. Because not only does cousin Dale, who doesn't have Pac-Man, Space Invaders, or anything like that,
nope.
He's got a stack of nudie books this high, right? And that's where Rusty just pops open Swing Shift, which is the name of them, right? And apparently, you get a sense that Dale introduces to Rusty masturbation for the first time.
I think that's right. I think the whole bop your baloney idea, which is
while
the first
he's
time
using the little hand grip exerciser.
Yeah. That's, I think when I saw it when I was, Rusty's age, that was definitely a scene, like you're saying. I was like, oh my gosh. And there was the Pac-Man on the bed behind Rusty as he was looking at the nudie magazines. And, the whole idea of Audrey saying to her, like, do you wrestle pigs? Really? Is that all you do here?
Yeah.
And she's like, no. And she brings out the big kind of cigar box of weed. Like it's one of
Yep.
those.
So the cousin introduced like bring drugs and sex to the really.
Exactly.
It's
Yeah.
like you city kid, or you suburban, Chicago suburban kids, you don't know what you're missing out here,
Yeah.
right?
And that whole Chicago suburb kind of well-off family that finds
Yep.
themselves, that's John Hughes, right? Like
Totally.
this is John Hughes. Like you kind of have the template of a lot of what he'll do afterwards kind of
Right.
showing up in this film. Like you can see a lot of the janitor from Breakfast Club in Clark Griswold a little bit, right? Like you can see
Yeah.
these things, or not even the janitor, actually like the dean or whoever,
Right.
the vice
It's funny.
principal.
Yeah, it's funny too, because I swear, like if I were to look back at, because we only see their life in Chicago very briefly, especially their home. You don't see
Yeah.
much of it, but the exterior of that house, it's almost like Ferris Bueller's house. Like
Yeah.
you know,
Totally. Like
yeah,
all of those, like you think planes, trains, and automobiles, like
yeah,
there's always this going back to this suburb of Chicago, which I wonder
right,
if in John Hughes' mind was like the beginning of all of his stories. Like it
right,
seems to
yeah.
it to me.
But we finally, get to probably again my favorite scene where cousin Eddie just shows up for dinner at the cookout, and he is rocking this amazing sweet silk shirt, and it's got these flared white paper flowers on it, right? And he's got the turquoise pants, and he's working the grill. He's even like greased up his hair. Oh, and I forgot to mention, like the what is it? Cousin Dale's got the greased up hair from the jump, and he's got the cut off. He's got the half shirt and the
Oh
jean
my
shorts.
God. That outfit was outstanding.
Yeah. But cousin Eddie's rolling up, right? And he's looking really good. But the meal's a little less than we would expect.
Yeah. And it really hits the mark. I have one contention point with you though.
Oh, what's that?
I don't think that shirt's silk. I think that shirt is 100% polyester.
No, come on,
I
really?
do. I think it's polyester, and I think he is ready to go up in flames. I watched that the whole time, and I was like, he's going to burn down to the ground. There'll be no cousin Eddie in the Christmas vacation. Like he's done.
Yeah, this is true.
But yeah,
Well,
I mean that's an amazing outfit. To your point.
right. And so he's looking kind of incredible. He's actually presenting, unlike most of the family, including even Clark, who's on to yet another, polo shirt at this point, like with the alligator on, right?
It's true.
And so we are finally introduced to Aunt Edna, comes out of nowhere, killing it. She just like cranks out of the porch with her pink hair rollers, her hairnet, her sweet floral house dress, horn rimmed glasses, and the walker, which she needs not at all, because it's more of a prop, because she immediately shoves it over to Ellen and says like, pass my beer, I'm good. No, hold my beer, I'm good. Let's have this lunch. And proceeds to pretty much insult Clark for the remainder of her
Do you
time
mean
on
Claude?
the film. Claude. Yes, Claude.
Claude, she says, and then immediately knows his name's Clark. So
Yes.
she's just trolling him from the moment they, and when he hears her name and she comes into the picnic table,
Right.
he loses the little he had of his hamburger helper out the other side in another great little comic, like, it's just a great, like, it sets it up, like the kind of, how would you say, the battle between these two that's going to be
Right.
at least a good part of the rest of the film.
Oh, I just remembered one other amazing highlight of this meal is cousin Vicky making the Kool-Aid. Do you remember how she's making her Kool-Aid? She's got her full forearm in the jar, stirring the powder in the water with her fingers. It's incredible.
Yeah. I do think, like, so a part of this film and a part of all of John Hughes' films from the 80s are about class distinctions, right? Or about like different, and you talked about the polo shirt before, and he goes into various colors. He finally has the pink polo shirt at the end when things go crazy for him. but like it goes. I think he has somewhat of a sedate alligator Lacoste shirt right now, but like that definitely places him in a class. Right. And obviously, Cousin Eddie's, I argue, polyester, brightly lit flowered shirt places him in a completely different class.
Oh, it's awesome.
And so like the fact that these kids are learning from them, but there's these associations that John Hughes is having fun with these class distinctions between these rich suburban kids from Chicago, or maybe not even rich, just middle class, and these country bumpkins. It makes for some really good humor in this movie.
Yeah, and so they're about to head back on the road, but there's just one more, because now we've also learned that Aunt Edna is saddled to them for the trip to Arizona. It's like, well, you're headed that way anyway, so take on Edna, right? She's coming, and well, there's one more guest, and that's a pretty surly dog named Dinky.
Dinky.
Who immediately just like mauls Chevy Chase's.
Oh my God.
Pants.
And the rest, it's like, Rusty, deal with Dinky. Rusty, take Dinky for a walk. Rusty.
Daddy bites. Bite him back.
But that's also the point where we learn that Chevy Chase or Clark has given Cousin Eddie money.
Yeah.
Because there's a great scene where Cousin Eddie's like sitting there telling everybody his woes. And then I think Aunt Edna says, just get to the point. He's obviously not taking a hint. Ask him for the money, right? Yeah. It's just great. What a great, uncomfortable scene. But Cousin Eddie gives Clark his white shoes.
Yep.
And that's a moment, right, where Clark is kind of like, I don't know if I like these, but those shoes, I think you could go in a hipster bar and you could win with those shoes.
White loafers, patent leather white loafers with a brass chain link strap. So this is the best thing. So I look these up. I look up this in the internet. I look for this. I find on eBay, and I took a screenshot of this to put into this if I can edit it in. I find on eBay a pair of these similar shoes, and I swear to God, the listing says Cousin Eddie.
Oh my God. I believe it. Like those shoes are like iconic, if you will.
They're Cousin Eddie shoes, right? And they come up later in the film. And so, and just so you know, Randy Quaid's final outfit, Cousin Eddie, he's ready. He's kind of slipped back.
Oh yeah,
he's in his bathrobe saying goodbye, and he's wearing nothing else but a bathrobe and a pair of Chuck Taylors.
Yeah, he is. I love your attention to the outfits. That's awesome.
Oh yeah, it's a big, for me. I felt like it was a big part of this presentation of this family. It's like how they dress. I mean, the kids are pretty typical. Like Rusty's wearing it at certain points. He's got a Chicago Cubs t-shirt.
That's right.
Audrey's a little stylish, which is nice. It's probably like the only thing she gets. And you've got Ellen, she's kind of stuck in mom outfits from the 80s for the most part. She's not given a lot of it. She and Clark are like that kind of very typical housewife, slash, working father who's, as he described it early in the film, it's like, I just get to see the kids 3 minutes a day on the weekend during the week when I come home. And then it's a couple hours on the weekend. So he's like, that's that portrait.
One of the things he says, though, as he's explaining why they need to drive across country rather than fly, because Ellen does say, shouldn't we fly early on? And he's like, no. And the argument is his precious little kids are growing up so quickly, and soon they'll be, gone. And we talked about it at the beginning, I think, or at least we referenced it. Like, that's kind of my situation right now. Like, I'm holding on to my kids for as long as I can before they do fully, move outside of this moment in life when we can even do road trips like that. In fact, me and my family are thinking about getting an RV because we live in Italy right now and doing a full-blown road trip across America and through the national parks. So we will maybe be living the National Lampoon's Vacation this summer.
This summer, really?
Yeah, this coming summer.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, it's a good segue. Like, we, as a family, my wife and I, Amanda, and we just more like travel up and down the island. We did one road trip all the way to Florida to see her mother, And oh man, did it go bad so fast. It was like there was crying in the back, my wife crying, my son crying, my daughter crying. They were like 6 and 4 at the time, and we were in a hotel before you knew it. And then the next day, continuing on to Florida. But those moments in a car with your family are unique, even if like now they have the modern conveniences of their screens and things like that. They're still your captives, right? And so you can make them talk, and it's kind of an interesting way to get your kids to talk about certain things. And there's also like classic things you have to deal with that are just crazy. I think my son Wyatt he was always, when he was like 1 or 2, my wife used to have to get in the back with him because he'd get upset. And so we had friends out with us in the Long Island, and we all drove home, and he was stuck in the back seat with our good friend Alexandra, who he was terrified of. She just had a lot of energy, and that just freaked him out. Mm-hmm. And it was just one of the most painful drives as a family I can ever remember, where he basically cried for an hour and a half straight because he was terrified of our high energy friend. And there's just nothing you can do. It's like, that's it. It's like, you're just like, I guess this is what we're doing.
Whoa!
Holiday Road.
Whoa! I mean, that song is the best. But yeah, I mean, could you imagine that? And my son, my youngest, thinks it's going to be fun. And I said to him, it might have moments of fun. Trust me, there will be a lot of misery and pain. So, yeah, we'll see.
And a lot of just, what do we do now?
Oh, yeah, exactly. Can I put on, my music? What about this? Yeah, that whole idea.
Yep. That's, I mean, yeah, the music, the choices. Well, back to the Griswolds, because now we're off to Colorado, and this is where we get a nice brief moment with the camp. They find a campground to have a nice. This is Horny Clark shows up for the second time, right? But this is a brief. This is a nice, just a cameo for Brian Doyle Murphy, Bill Murray's older brother. He's also known as the mayor of in Groundhog's Day, right?
That's right.
He's awesome.
Wasn't he in Caddyshack too?
Yeah, he's in a lot of stuff. He's done a lot of, character parts. And there's 2 character actor all-stars, which we get to, like all-time favorites of mine. Mm-hmm. But, when Clark's trying to have a moment again, this is where his nickname Sparky actually shows up, I think, for the first time. Oh, Sparky.
Sparky.
But the dog kills it. Right. And he just like, the dog starts mauling him. And so
it might explain Horny Sparky, though, if every time they're trying to consummate, there's some, interruption, if you will.
Yep. Coitus interruptus. Poor Clark. Poor Clark. Yep.
You don't have a lot of sympathy for Clark, I'm noticing.
I mean, there's things about Clark that I appreciate, because he's a working stiff. This is his moment with his family. Is he thinking of? But there's a part of Chevy Chase where I just want to constantly. I know you appreciate it, but I just want to punch him all the time, right? Because because I think he for me, it's in a funny way, it's the opposite. I think his like Caddyshack or his Fletch personality, where he's just, we know he doesn't care about anybody else but himself, right?
Yeah.
And so you're just like, kind of love him, loathing everybody else and making fun of everybody else. But this is Chevy Chase trying to, in a weird way, be sympathetic. And I think it's kind of, I mean, you're appreciating his efforts at sympathy, right? And he is funny still, but it's just so not Chevy Chase. Right?
I have a theory about what this character means. And so I'll go into that later at the end.
Okay.
But I will say this. Here's a great example. They're in Colorado. They get to the camps, like you said. They deal with Bill Murray's older brother. They get it. They get ripped off. Yeah. They go to the tents. The first tent they go up to, Ellen is like, "Oh, Clark, this tent smells terrible." And then immediately Clark goes, "And Edna, this is your tent." Like, I just love that. Like, it was perfect timing. It was just like and that does make me kind of love Clark throughout this movie in a lot of different ways.
But moments later, there's the worst atrocity in the film.
All right, I'm trying to think of it.
Clark leaves the dog on the bumper of the car and drives away unknowingly that the dog's still there until a motorcycle cop pulls them over on this, like, desolate road in Colorado and just goes off. It's the cop is more upset than
totally.
than
That's
Chevy
the
Chase.
best part. And Chevy Chase is trying to look upset, which is the best. Again,
and he literally shivers.
Yeah, he's like, ooh,
yeah,
it's so good. Like, that is another example of Chevy Chase, like, really killing this role, like, because you don't sympathize him with entirely, but you do. He's like, he got straddled with this freaking ant and the dog, and it's ruining his trip. Like, you can understand where he's like, yeah, freaking dog, I'm sorry, you're dead. I'm on it, Like, I understand.
Well, this bodes well for our sensibilities and sympathies being on different sides.
Maybe, right?
Yeah, and that'll be good. That'll lead to. By the way, we didn't, soon after he's like, I'm done with the dog. We've already skipped over. He has twice flirted with Christy Brinkley.
Oh, that's right.
And so we are in. This is not only is he seeing Christy Brinkley for the third time, driving 80, 90 miles per hour down the highway trying to keep up with a Ferrari, which is ridiculous. And so, I mean, Christy Brinkley in this film is very funny because she's like the magical Christmas Land character for for a dad like fantasy, right? And she's terrible actress, but obviously incredibly beautiful and an icon from the 80s, right?
Oh, that's it. Like Billy Joel, Christy Brinkley, Long Island, like, we as kids were like, what?
Yeah. Billy Joel?
Yeah. Christy Brinkley?
Yep.
That's the poster in my room.
Yeah, exactly. And so this leads to for the second time, Clark almost kills the family, right? So he gets into the oncoming lane to catch up with the Ferrari in the Wagon Queen truckster, right? He's like, I'm pushing 90 or 80, 90 in this thing.
Which only went to 85. Yeah.
Yeah, the speedometer, right? And literally an oncoming truck forces him off the road on one side, back off the road on the other side, somehow does not flip the car. And no one wakes up because everybody else is napping while he's like picturing himself with Christy Brinkley in her Ferrari, right?
It's the best. And then he's sweating like, profusely. And Ellen's like, are you all right, Clark? Is everything all right? I'm fine. That's just, again, another great scene. And look, he didn't kill the family, did he? Second time he didn't kill the family.
Well, we're on to number 3, where he does at least, there are some injuries, which is when they get lost in Arizona soon after. When he plows the truckster, he's like literally looking at the map while holding the wheel, and he goes right through a road closed barrier and launches the truckster. As Rusty says, that must have been at least 50 yards, Dad.
Yeah.
And you can see the front end of the truckster hit first, which means everybody's going through the windshield. I mean, with those, especially the kids in the back, because they're not wearing seatbelts. You don't wear seatbelts in the back seat back then, right?
No.
And one of the quotes is like, I ate my brain. Like Rusty says something about his brain, and
I picked my brain. He had his finger up his nose because he was picking his nose, and
that's what it is.
His finger touched his brain.
Yeah. But this does lead to my favorite moment between Rusty and his dad. They have the father. There's been a few moments, father-son moments. Dad, Rusty went with Dad to get the car. He's kind of his dad's. He's a fan of his dad. You can tell he's a fan of his dad. Like at the saloon, he's just like yucking it up with them about the bartender. He's like into it, right? But, this has been a little bit of a tragedy, and he's trying to buoy his dad up. It's like, wow, what a jump, Dad. That was amazing. You just like fucking flew that car. Like, it was amazing.
50 yards.
50 yards, right? And so they have a talk. He invites him to sit down, and they have this big, father-son moment. and Rusty proceeds to plow through a can of beer like he's at like an Ohio State fraternity party.
Yeah.
And he's like, to Clark, it's like this big moment, sharing his first drink with his son, and you just get a sense like, I think Rusty's had a few already.
Yeah, and he does mention that like his father shared the beer with him. So like there is that father-son thing between, Clark and his dad, and now Clark and Rusty. And I love the scene where Clark is on top of the car after Rusty says the whole thing about 50 yards. He's like, certain amount of pride after crashing the car and like, keeping everyone in the middle of the desert. He's like, 50 yards, like kind of taking a certain amount of like, I did well. Like, I just dig that. It's
and
great.
The car somehow, is repairable because they find these mechanics, and these are my two. The first one is Mickey Jones with the beard, right? The big beard.
Totally.
That guy is a 70s and 80s TV actor all-star.
Absolutely.
Rockford Files, Incredible Hulk, Charlie's Angels, Dukes of Hazards, Galactica, Chips, Flo, MASH, The A-Team. Like, that guy was like, I wanted his job more than anything as an adult.
Yeah,
Can you imagine just to be a bad guy? He always got to be like a bad guy. And he always got beat up in these like A-Team type shows and Chips and stuff like that. What a wonderful career.
Yeah. No, he's instantly recognizable. He's got the beard, and he's the scummy auto mechanic that kind of fixes the car, but gives them like really out of aligned wheels, I guess you could say.
Which magically gets fixed, like 2 scenes later, but whatever.
Exactly. Yeah, I love that scene. I also love the scene where he's actually walking through the desert.
Yeah.
And he's kind of imagining, and then he gets to find them like after like it seems like he's dying. He's like, is anyone else thirsty?
Oh wait, this is one of my favorite quotes that from Beverly D'Angelo's talking about her husband, and he's like, and he's trying to call the cops. He's talking to the cops and trying to find him. And says, and they ask him what's his height, his weight, and she's like, I don't know. And she goes, all I know is he was a saint with children and a genius with food additives.
That's right.
So we finally know what Clark's job was, right?
Yeah, he was actually a
food
scientist. Yeah, he created the 80s model of great food, right?
Yeah, perfect, high processed, wonderful, like addictive food.
All of those Big Macs and other things you won in the '84 Olympics were because of
Clark Griswold. He designed the taste of that, pretty sure. And so there's a brief moment where they're in dire straits, and they with the car they lose. There's many scenes where the luggage goes flying off the top of the roadster, which is endless comedy. It's like they go flying. It's like in the opening scene, they're trying to leave their garage of the home, and they have all the stuff in the top of the car, and they pull out, and it immediately falls off. And that's probably the first of like a dozen times that the luggage rack is empty.
Recurring trope. It always comes on. Yeah.
But they've lost their credit cards, they've lost their money, and Clark actually, again, not the best dad here, because he literally, not the best dad, but at the same time resourceful here, right?
Yeah. He's
canceled his credit cards because his wife's credit card's lost, not recognizing his credit card is connected to it. And so they're low on funds, and he goes to a hotel and tries to write a check, but he's like, you don't have a credit card, so I can't do that. And he's a complete dick to Clark, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so, and he's literally willing this, like, here, I'm writing you a check for $1,000. Just give me $300. You keep $700 for yourself. And he's still no.
Yeah.
Right. So what does Clark do? He leaves the check. He bangs his fist out of frustration. The register pops open. He grabs all the cash and leaves the check, and he's outie. He's taking care of his family. I respect it there.
And is he stealing?
I mean, I don't know. You think the clerk is going to... I think that... No, because I think the clerk is taking that $1,000 and keeping it for himself.
Yeah. Yeah. So he put the $1,000 check in there. He took the money, And then he just, that's the scene where they're in the Grand Canyon. He's like, oh yeah, take a picture, well, let's go, and like, he's like, hurry up. Oh, so yeah, exactly, with his head back and forth. That's another great moment. Like,
no, that's Chevy at his best right there,
the
right?
physical humor in this, really does, it kind of translates well for his character and how frenetic he is at times.
Yeah.
Trying to get things done.
I mean, we're almost where he finally meets Christy Brinkley in person. And that's the scene where I was actually appreciating Chevy Chase the most, because in contrast to Christy Brinkley, he was just like trying so hard to carry her and carry that scene.
Yeah.
And his physicality is incredible in that scene. I agree. Like he was like infamous for his physicality. He literally would tumble down stairways when he would play the character of Ford in SNL, right? And so totally famous for doing that. So we have our next, sojourn. We're almost to LA. We're almost to the end of the film. We're almost to the end of the journey here in this podcast.
We're in like Flagstaff, right?
Yeah, yeah. And sure enough, Edna just dies in the back seat leaning on the kids, and the kids are like totally flipping out.
Disgusting, right?
Yeah. They're like, and Clark's like, dude, we got to make it to Wally World, and Ellen's like, what do you mean?
Yeah.
Is
he wrong?
Second cousin or third aunt? I don't even know what Edna is to her exactly. I mean,
Edna is her aunt. And then,
it's her aunt. It's got to be just her aunt.
And then her cousin was the son who wasn't at home when they
brought
Edna to the house.
So they're not stopping. Edna ends up on the roof of the truckster, wrapped up in the pouring rain, and they literally just say, "See ya."
Yeah, they leave a note, right?
They leave a note, but this is a bridge too far for Ellen when Clark is trying to say his last respects and starts talking about, Hindus speak of karma and his prayer to Edna, and it's just not going well. No. And Ellen loses it. And as they're driving off, they give up.
Yep. They want to go
back. And what does Clark do?
He loses his shit.
He totally loses his shit.
And this is when I most sympathize with Clark and empathize with Clark, because I lose my shit like that all the time. As a father, that was when I was like, I'm all in. Like, this is totally believable to me. I would have lost my shit like 5 times on that trip by now. But he loses it, and he loses it convincingly, because the whole family is like, who is this guy? What happened here? Something broke.
I mean, this is, if you think about it, like the language in this film is a comedy, and they would never, he F-bombs 3-4 times during his tirade to his kids. It's like, we're 10 hours from the fucking park, man. We're almost there.
I mean, again, great moment for Chevy Chase. He nails it. I think I really do. Like, that was the scene in the film I was like, I totally relate. And that's the scene in the film where Antonella was like, yeah, that's too close to home. And again, the wife is not convincing, so she had her ongoing critique. But that's funny. I did. I dug that scene. And, and I think, okay, here's I'll start laying out my theory a little bit. Like, I think Clark Griswold is like ground zero for like the new dad, right? Like, you have a 70s dad. A 70s dad would be smoking cigarettes, drinking scotch, and throwing darts at a dad like Clark Griswold. A dad like Clark Griswold would never have a featured kind of role in a 70s film to speak of. John, Belmondo would be like kicking him in the ass. Like, all the cool guys of the 70s would be kicking his ass. This is the nerd dad, like, you know what I mean? Dad joke dad, Homer Simpson dad. This is the template. Exactly. This is the template for the dad that we're still existing with in American pop culture. I think Clark Griswold is ground zero for that. Now, I might be wrong, but my theory is that that's why this film is so kind of deep in the kind of cultural memory.
That's a really good take, because I remember when because we can jump to, like, there's a fight in the hotel afterwards, and he ends up in a bar meeting Christy Brinkley, and somehow ends up, because he's an owner of hotels, and that's not really his family, right?
That is
that's
the best.
That's his brother's family, and it's his brother's family.
He's in disguise.
So, he's in disguise with his brother's family and doing all the bad, stupid stuff that you're supposed to do, so he can maintain his anonymity as the owner of all these hotels across the country.
And for me, that might be his worst infraction, is when he completely disowns his family. Yeah. I can see that. Trying to kill them, no. Disowning them to get, a piece of ass, not good.
Not good at all. But in the moment where he somehow makes it to the pool just outside it's on the hotel property, right? It's not like he goes and takes off with her in the Ferrari and they go somewhere, which would be way more sensible if he's actually going to cheat on his wife. No, he decides to skinny dip with Christy Brinkley in a pool at the hotel, right?
Yeah,
and it's a motel, so it's got the doors right that see all outside, the pool. Yeah. All facing the pool, but it's back to your point. That's when I'm like, oh, Chevy Chase has got the classic dad bod, right? Like he's just like, and he's tall. I mean, he's kind of good looking, but he's also just a normal looking dude, right?
Yeah,
he's not
got
like
the hairline going.
No, he's no Brad Pitt or anything like that. He's just a regular dude. And he is a nerd. He is just a big, dumb nerd. And
totally.
It's funny. It's going to be interesting to think about, like, what is our kids' vision of dad going to be that's going to differ, right?
I think my kids think of me as like a Chevy Chase figure,
right?
Particularly since I'm in Europe and I don't know the language.
No, I'm absolutely that too. I'm the nerd who plays Magic the Gathering, like so. Like literally, like I'm going on Wednesday nights, to my local game store, right? So this is very, very true. And we're definitely, despite your outbursts at times with your kids, it sounds like I'm the chill dad. Generally speaking, I have outbursts around stuff. Like I'm the classic dad who gets pissed off about stuff being organized and disorganized. That's my problem. I can't keep my cool with that.
I take it out on people.
Yeah.
I go right to the source.
Yeah. So my wife has always learned, it's like, if I'm getting mad, at least I'm not getting mad at people. I'm just like, this fucking little thing, why the fuck does it do this way? It's like, but it's not usually. So I'm generally chill in that regard. So
do you think you're better than me somehow?
No, there is no certainty of that status whatsoever, Jim Groom. For sure. I am.
I have a question for you, though. I do.
Okay.
Why the hell does Christy Brinkley flirt like she does and seem to be taken with Clark Griswold?
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like, I think this is literally, a mirage, right? Like, it almost like it didn't happen, because the way Ellen reacts to it afterwards, like, oh, it's fine. I'm also at fault. Like, that's literally almost a line. It's my fault too.
I think that's when Anto laughed.
Yeah. Exactly. And you're just like, wait, what? So it's almost like, because it's like this beautiful red Ferrari pulling up next to a roadster and just flirting with the dad bod dad. It's awesome. In a station wagon. It's just like, it's obviously beyond improbable. So it's 100% a fantasy. So I would suggest, like, Christy Brinkley actually doesn't exist in this scene. She's not really ever there. And Clark just like loses his shit because he's like fantasizing, and he jumps in the pool and just wakes everybody up. And he's like,
yeah, that's the best scene. He's the one who wakes everyone up because it's so cold.
Right. And so he's like fantasizing about, like, this is what I want. I want my sexy time on my vacation. He does. He spells it out in the beginning when they're with the vibrating bed, and he's the bed just kind of ruins his speech. But he's talking about, like, I this is a time to reconnect with my babies. Yeah. This is a time to relax, and this is a time for some sexy time with my wife, right? And so,
isn't that what we all want from our vacation? Whoever that special person is, you know,
Yeah.
like there is some connection that needs to happen on vacation.
Right. And so, yeah, I'm still sitting with like, if I were to really analyze it, I think Christy Brinkley is literally a mirage. Like, there's an earlier scene where he's eating his like pea-soaked bologna sandwich and like pretending to dance with Christy Brinkley, like it's a prop in a dance with Christy Brinkley.
One of my favorite scenes of the movie.
Yeah, and she's like drinking a beer next to her Ferrari, hanging out with two truckers. Like she's not real.
You're right. Like that's a commercial.
Right.
And like he's reacting with a bologna sandwich. And he again kills that. Like Chevy Chase is so funny with that bologna sandwich. He just got a bologna sandwich and I'm dying hysterical at what he's able to make me do. And again, I wasn't, I kind of had been jaded on Chevy Chase and I didn't see his like kind of comeback with Community and all that. Supposedly he was great, but then fell off. But like, I kind of Caddyshack for me was always his high point. And so
his pinnacle, yeah.
Yeah. So now it was kind of really cool to kind of connect. But then again, he has become this is his most famous role. This is his most famous character. More than Fletch, more than anything really he's done. This is the one that has kind of, sustained the kind of identity of Chevy Chase as a comedian.
And, I mean, there are the two sequels. We have European Vacation. We have Christmas Vacation. At least in European Vacation, he finally gets his sexy time because it turns into a pornographic video that's sold throughout Europe.
And he's still on the hunt. He's still on the quest.
Yeah, he sure is.
But yeah, and of all things, Christmas Vacation becomes, the most successful and the most loved in some way.
Yeah. I mean, holiday movies.
I don't understand.
Well, holiday movies have a leg up, right? Like a holiday movie is that, especially it's a family. Family. I mean, and I think that's one of the things like we're going to have to do. We're headed into the holidays. We're on vacation. Like we had a long, long summer into this fall to start this podcast, and but the holidays are just seminal to the family genre in film, right?
Yes.
And Christmas Vacation, which I don't think will be we wouldn't expose you to Chevy Chase again right away. But and it's funny because we're kind of almost done. We don't even. I mean, when they make it to Wally World and it's so sad it's closed and Clark goes nuts and gets the handgun and they go on the rides with John Candy, who's awesome.
Yeah,
that stuff doesn't really matter at this point, right? Like it's kind of, all the catharsis comes when weirdly his wife apologizes to him being in naked in the pool with girls and trying to explain it to Rusty and Rusty being the sage of the family is like, yeah, Dad, yeah, the waitress, did you get her order? Yeah. And it's like, yep. And
that was
what do you think? And Rusty's like, yeah, that sounds great. Do you think Mom will buy it?
That's right. That's great. And like you said, he does become the sage. And people say even that, Michael Anthony Hall, a little bit upstaged Chevy or was right there with Chevy, right? All the time. And that was impressive. And that started his career where he started working with 16 Candles and, the other one we mentioned early, Breakfast Club, Weird Science. But interestingly, my vacation, like I loved the first Vacation, but I sat down to watch European Vacation as probably a 15-year-old or however old I was. And I was like, wait, that's not Rusty. Wait, that's not Audrey. What's going on? Right. I couldn't that broke the film for me. Like I couldn't recover from that.
Well, it's sad because they had to, because it's in the final scene, they originally had they didn't kidnap John Candy, who was a security guard. They kidnapped the patriarch of Wally World, Roy Wally, and who has 7 kids. Who talks about he took a trip to Florida once with all of them, and it was the worst week of his life. So he sympathizes, and that's how they get out of it. But they originally kidnapped Roy Wally in the first shoot, and it tested terribly. And so they reshot with John Candy and they kidnapped the security guard, but it's months later. And Anthony Michael Hall is a good 1.5 inches, 2 inches taller.
That's what they said. Yeah, exactly. Like he had grown.
Right, and in the final, credits of the film, they have it's great. They have like the photos of the trip, right? That's the way that they craft the ending. It's like, oh, here's all the photos from the trip, and there's a couple photos where you see Anthony Michael Hall standing with his dad early in the trip versus the photos at the very end, and you can really see the difference. Like he's literally above his dad's shoulder when earlier he's at his dad's Chevy Chase's shoulder, right? And like Aubrey's character, she's like tiny because in earlier in the film, like Aubrey and Rusty seem about the same age, around the same size, right? Because Rusty's kind of prepubescent, and so ultimately, why I'm saying this is there's a reason. There's no way Anthony Michael Hall could be in the other movies. He became a giant. He got so tall, right?
But they wanted him. They just couldn't. He wouldn't do it because he was kind of at the pinnacle of his success. I mean, you could argue that he was a tall 15-year-old or 16-year-old or whatever it was. So you could argue it, but he didn't want to be in it.
Right. Which is too bad, right?
I think it is too bad.
He didn't mature too well in adult film roles.
No, he had a hard time. By the time it went to Edward Scissorhands, it was like, what the hell?
Oh, that's right. Yeah, he was terrible. What a heel.
He was Stanley Kubrick's first choice for Full Metal Jacket, and he lost it because he was, I guess, negotiating too hard with Kubrick for more money, and Kubrick was like, no.
And that's how Matthew Modine ended up?
Yes, he would have been in Full Metal Jacket.
Wow, that's crazy.
That is insane. I learned that today. That's things you learn today. That's what I learned.
I know.
TIL.
Well, TIL, this is, I think, a nice way to wrap it up. This is something that we're excited to keep going on with, and we're going to have to put this together and put it out. I think we're going to be just in YouTube at first, but if we keep going, we might do the official podcast thing with an actual feed on the services like Spotify and iTunes. We got to figure that out.
We might get to Bed Bath & Beyond, but we don't know if we have enough time.
All right, Jim. Such a pleasure. I love it. Looking forward to doing a lot of these.
I am too. Michael, you're the best. Big fan.